Good afternoon. My name is Jim Foster, and I'm director of the City Club of Cleveland, and pleased to welcome you to this important debate between the major party candidates vying to represent Ohio's 14th District. The City Club is the oldest continuous forum in the country. Over our 100 years, we have a long and distinguished history of presenting political debates, which provide an opportunity for the audience to be able to compare and contrast these two candidates. Each and every week throughout the year, the City Club presents interesting programs with well-informed speakers addressing the significant issues of the day. We would be pleased to welcome you as a supporter of the City Club and our ongoing mission of civic dialogue. So we invite you to consider membership. There's both corporate and individual membership information on your tables. And for information about the City Club, including upcoming programs, you can always visit our website, www.cityclub.org. There's a full listing of upcoming programs that's updated constantly on the website. Now I'm going to turn the program over to John Hutchinson. John is a veteran political writer for the News Herald, which covers Lake and Geauga counties, both of which are entirely within the 14th District. The 14th District also includes all of Ashtabula County, as well as parts of Cuyahoga, Portage, Summit, and Trumbull counties. John?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Jim, and I'm delighted to moderate this debate between Virgil Blanchard and Dave Joyce. This has been an exciting race so far. What seemed to be a low-key contest between a perennial candidate and a beloved incumbent took a sharp turn when Congressman Steve LaTourette removed himself from the race, citing an ineffective Congress as the reason for his retirement. The result was a last-minute introduction of Republican Dave Joyce to fill his slot. Virgil Blanchard, an accountant who has run for this position every 2 years since 2000, maintained his candidacy. I will let the candidates outline their qualifications further in their opening statements if they wish. The debate will be about an hour long, split into 4 segments. First, each candidate has a total of 4 minutes for both an opening statement and rebuttal. It is their choice as to how they will each divide the time. Again, we will hear from each candidate twice in this segment, opening statements from each, then rebuttals by each, with a total time limit of 4 minutes. After these opening exchanges, we will have questions from me, the moderator. In the third part of the program, we will have questions from audience members, and finally, each candidate will make closing remarks. We're very pleased to welcome this excellent audience with us here today. I know many of you support one or the other of these candidates, and we appreciate you giving everyone a chance to be heard by holding your applause. The order of opening statements was determined by drawing a few minutes ago. Mr. Blanchard will present first. And Dale, if you want to go ahead with your opening statement.
Thank you, John. I want to thank the City Club for inviting myself and Mr. Joyce to appear here, and I thank all the guests and all you folks out in Radio Land and TV Land. I'm Dale Blanchard, and I'm running for Congress because we need to grow the American economy. Now, in order to grow the economy, you have to first be able to diagnose at any time exactly what's wrong with the economy. Now, right now, the problem is not that the government spends too much or that it spends too little. And the problem is not that the government taxes too much or that it taxes too little. The problem with the economy is this. It's suffering from a lack of aggregate economic activity, primarily because American consumers are not spending. So, why aren't American consumers not spending? Well, first of all, we've got 20 million Americans who are out of work. And guess what, folks? They're not spending. We've got another 10 million Americans who are working part-time, but they'd rather be working full-time. And as a result, they're not spending as much. We've got another 20 million Americans who are working full-time, but still working in jobs with capabilities. And as a result, they're not spending as much. Now, most Americans are not adversely affected by the economic downturn right now. But millions of these Americans are suffering from a lack of consumer confidence because they're concerned that they may lose their jobs. Finally, from late 2006 until 2009, as the Bush administration came to an end, We all saw the loss of value of our number one asset, our homes, plummeted tremendously. And as a result, we don't feel as rich, and we're not spending as much. Now, this is what I'm going to do to remedy that. First thing I'm going to do when I get to Washington is I'm going to propose a 5% tax cut on all income. And this is not a tax cut for the millionaires and billionaires. No, no, no. This is for the tax cut for the 98% of us who are not millionaires and billionaires. It's going to be a tax cut on the first $150,000 of income for individuals and on the first $300,000 of income for married couples. Now, and the duration of this tax cut is going to be for 5 years. And the reason why I'm going to cut your taxes is not because I'm a nice guy, even though I am a nice guy. Right, David? The reason I'm going to cut your taxes is I want to put more money in your pocket so you'll go out there and spend it. And this will encourage business owners to invest more in their businesses as you create stronger markets for American businesses. Now, in addition to that, I also have a string of tax cuts that will be implemented for businesses that will encourage businesses to invest more in their businesses and encourage them to increase their overall employment. Now, not only do I want to go to Washington to grow the economy, I'm going to stand side by side, shoulder to shoulder with the AARP to defeat any and all Republican efforts to cut Medicare and Social Security benefits. So again, I'm Virgil Blanchard. I'm going to reserve the rest of my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchard. You will have 1 minute remaining for your rebuttal. Now we'll have opening remarks from Mr. Joyce.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchinson. Thank you all for the opportunity to be here. We're having some technical malfunction, I guess. It's a pleasure to be here today, and it's a lot different from, I've had the honor of being here before at the City Club and listening to different speeches, and I can tell you one thing, the view's a lot different from up here. The last 24 years have been a tremendous experience for me as a prosecuting attorney for Geauga County. I've had the ability to represent not only the townships, the villages, the county, but all the school boards, as well as the state of Ohio. And in the state of Ohio, you represent things on all criminal matters. And I've had a big change this year. What happened in the first place was that on February 25th, on a Saturday morning, I had a sentencing for a lady who was intoxicated who ran over my friend Chip Henry, who was a judge. On Monday morning, there was an unspeakable horror that took place in our town. It ripped the fabric of our society. And I remember getting home that night and sitting on the edge of the bed and discussing life and you know, no matter what I could do as a prosecutor, there was nothing I could do to stop what had occurred and how this has changed me. And I really had the idea that I wanted to do more. And Kelly, my sweetheart, said, you're doing the best you can. Some things are just, you can't change them. But she understood and appreciated the fact I wanted to do more. And when we were all surprised by our congressman retiring as quickly and as abruptly as he did, I saw this as an opportunity to move from the county to the country and try to do what's right for everyone. I feel that as a public servant, I've been sort of, at that point in my life, I was sort of like a prize fighter who was sitting in his corner, and now I'm energized to go out and take out the last few rounds. At 55, I'm not young, and I could have been easy to sit around and complain about how things were going. But that's not the way it should be. I want to go out there and do the things that Steve has done for the past 18 years in Congress. I want to fight for Northeastern Ohio. I want to fight for the people of the 14th District. And I want to make sure that our children and our grandchildren have the opportunity to grow up in the America we grew up in. No matter where I go in the district, and it's a big district, let me tell you, you hear the same things. Whether it's small business, big business, for those banks, or whether it's a sole employee, they tell you that there's uncertainty out there. They don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. They don't know what their taxes are going to look like. They don't know what their health care costs, and they're sick of the regulations that keep on coming from the governmental agencies. And I hear them. I heard them loud and clear. And I think it's something we need to do. My undergrad major was accounting, and like Dale, I have an accounting background. And I was, when I came out of law school, I originally went out and applied at the big 8 firms. Now we're down to 3 or 4, I'm not sure. And I wanted to do trial work, and I ended up as a prosecutor. But I'm done doing the prosecuting work. I want to get back at the important business at hand. When I've been asked what I want to do, I said, first I want to win. And after November 6th, we'll determine the rest of it. But I want to go after the budget. I want it to go after regulations. I want to go control the deficit because it's strangling America. When we were in accounting school, we talked about billion, and that was a big number, and we're $16 trillion in debt. We didn't get there overnight, and we're not going to recover tomorrow. It's going to take a lot of work, and I want to work across the aisle and with everybody in Congress to try to move in the same direction and try to set a picture so people can plan, just like you plan in your home and you plan in your business, for 1, 3, and 5 years out, so we can get America moving in the right direction again. That's my vision for America. That's what I want to do if you elect me to Congress, and thank you very much.
Okay, thanks to both of you. We will now have rebuttals. Mr. Blanchard, you have 1 minute remaining.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, that is different. As I mentioned earlier, the number one thing we need to do is we need to stimulate the economy. The last time our economy was in this bad shape was during the Great Depression. And there were many stimulus packages that were implemented as part of the New Deal by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and even stimulus packages that were implemented by Herbert Hoover. But none of them really totally brought us out of the Great Depression. They helped, but they didn't bring us out. But what was it that did bring us out? Well, what it was the number one, the largest stimulus package ever passed. It was called World War II. Now, I'm not suggesting that we need to start a war, but stimulus works. And therefore, that's why I believe that what we need to do is cut taxes. And the federal deficit will take a hit, but if we put money in the pockets of individuals and they begin to spend it, this economy will turn around. Our problem with our economy is not that that the government is too large. The problem is we got to get consumers to get out there and start spending. We got to spend our way out of this recession.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchard. And now, Mr. Joyce, you'll have 30 seconds remaining for your rebuttal.
Thank you. I appreciate Mr. Blanchard's view of America. I just look at it a little bit differently. I want to represent the hardworking taxpayers and give them the government that they deserve. One that's held accountable, one that's held to a budget, and one that spends within their limit and lives like we all do at home on a budget. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I have a series of questions for the candidates. And again, candidates, you'll have 1 minute to respond to each question. I will reserve the right to ask a follow-up question as well. Candidates will each have 30 seconds to respond to any follow-up questions. So let's move forward ahead. And the first question I have is for both of you guys. It's in regard to health care. And I wondered if you would repeal the nation's new health care law, commonly referred to as Obamacare. And if you do support a repeal, what would you do to address the health care situation and people who are uninsured? And are there components of Obamacare that you would keep? So if we could start with you, Dave.
Sure. I believe health care needs some reform, just not the reform that comes in the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare as it's been known. It's a 2,200-page bill, of which about 10 pages may be worthwhile. And we need to replace this with a bipartisan bill that addresses things like the cost curve and medical expenses being more expensive all the time. We've done nothing to address that in this bill. We need to address the insurance situation in a way that if we can buy insurance from a get-go for our cars off of the TV screen, why can't we have buy medical insurance across state lines? We need to allow for some of the good points. There are some good points. The fact that 26-year-olds get to stay on your insurance, the fact that their pre-existing conditions get to stay on insurance, those are important. That's what America does. We care about our sick. But we also need to do things like make sure that the insurance pooling that there is allows for everyone to get into the system in a way that's fair, in a way that's cost-effective.
And Mr. Blanchard, would you repeal the nation's new health care law, commonly referred to as Obama? And if you do support a repeal, what would you do to address the health care situation and keep people who are, or help people who are uninsured? And are there any components of the law that you support?
Well, I would not repeal it. I totally support the Affordable Care Act. It provides that people with pre-existing conditions and people who are poor but are working can purchase insurance at an affordable price. That's why it's called the Affordable Care Act. The overall objective of the Democrats with this act was to try to reduce the number of uninsured people in this country to zero. That was the intent. And we're going to get pretty close to that. But the Republicans, their argument against this bill is this. They just don't want any employer to provide health insurance for their employees. Not only themselves, and the number one constituency group of the Republican Party are conservative small business owners. They don't want to provide health insurance for their employees, and they don't want to have to compete with other businesses that do that. And that's what it boils down to. Now, actually, Mr. Joyce had mentioned that there were a couple of provisions that he liked about it. I think he actually likes it, but politically, he has to say that he's against the Affordable Care Act. Thank you. I know you can, but.
The next question I have, Mr. Blanchard, you've talked about your plan to cut taxes across the board. Specifically, and this will be for both of you guys as well, what is your position about extending the Bush tax cuts for everybody, including people who earn more than $250,000 per year?
I'm for extending the Bush tax cuts. I guess they are too. I'm for extending the Bush tax cuts for incomes of under $250,000 for individuals and under $200,000 for individuals, and for married couples of $250,000 for married couples. Just as that's pretty much the Democratic line, and to allow those tax cuts to expire so that we can pay down on what's called our structural deficit. Our deficit can be broken down into two parts. Part of it is a structural deficit, which is the deficit we'd have even if we had full employment, or let's say unemployment levels of 4% or less. We'd still have a deficit. That's why the president wants to raise taxes on those people who can best afford it. But for the rest of us, we want to go ahead and allow those tax cuts to remain in place. In fact, I want to actually go on further and cut taxes even further. I want to be more aggressive with the tax cuts that we've been implementing over the past 2 years with the Social Security holiday. Thank you.
Mr. Joyce, what is your position on extending the Bush tax cuts for everyone, including people who earn more than $250,000 per year?
I stand for the simple principle, until we see real growth and real jobs in America, that we should not raise taxes on anyone. President Obama himself has stated in 2009 that to raise the taxes in a weak economy is not a good idea. We need to replace our tax code with something that is simpler, that is flatter, and that is fair. It's a shame that Joann Fabrics, the leading employer in our district, is paying at 35% and GE can afford to pay 0%. And it's because they have the lobbyists and they have the accountants and lawyers that work for them, when the hardworking taxpayers of America don't have that same opportunity. They don't have the opportunity to time their income. They don't have the opportunity to determine when they're going to take their income. Hardworking taxpayers get it every 2 weeks or maybe once a month, and they don't have those choices. It should be simple, it should be flat, and it should be fair for all Americans.
Okay, next question I have is, and we'll start with Mr. Joyce this time. The issue of jobs is front and center in many people's minds. And how would you go about the facilitation of job creation, and what role, if any, does the government have?
Well, the only way government creates jobs is if we increase taxes and hire more people at the IRS, and that's something none of us will want. What we need to do is unleash the people who create jobs, the small business owners. Allow them to expand their businesses by letting them know that the taxes are going to be fair, they're going to be firm and flat, that we're going to have regulations that are consistent with their growth, not meant to shut them down, and that they're going to be implemented in a way that's fair for them also, because they should be party to the process. If we have objectives we want to meet by regulations, then the businesses should be party to the process in making sure that we do those over a period of time instead of shutting anyone down. And lastly, we need to cut the uncertainty with the fact that we don't know what the health care law is going to be. That's why I'm in favor of repealing it and stepping back. Private industry has done a great job of insuring their own. We need to let them insure their own. And if we can cut their taxes, cut their regulations, and allow them to do what they do best, grow jobs, America will prosper.
And Mr. Blanchard, how would you go about the facilitation of job creation, and what role, if any, does government play?
Well, government plays a tremendous role in that the government sets income tax policy. As I mentioned earlier, I want to cut taxes on individuals so that people have more money in their pocket and will go out and spend it. This will create stronger demand for goods and services. On the supply side, I also have a string of tax cuts in the form of an increased employment credit, whereby for every percentage increase in your employment for a business, they will receive a 1% credit on all of their payroll. So a company, for example, that goes out and increases its headcount by 10%, they would get a 10% income tax credit for all of their payroll. Folks, that tax cut is 2.5 times larger than any tax cut that any Republican is talking about. I want to use the tax code as incentives to encourage businesses to increase jobs and expand their business operations. Thank you.
Okay, the next question I have is, Ohio's unemployment rate is currently at 7%, which is lower than the nation's 7.8% figure. Do you feel Ohio is better off than the rest of the country, or is this a misleading statistic? If we could start with you, Mr. Blanchard.
Well, thanks to President Obama and his assistance with the auto industry and making sure that the auto industry did not go bankrupt. A lot of auto manufacturing jobs have returned here to northeastern Ohio. It is a little bit misleading, to be honest, though. What Ohio has been doing for really 20 years, or probably longer than that, is we've been exporting a lot of our unemployment. A lot of people leave the state. And so one of the things that I want to do is not only implement policies that we grow the economy, but also implement policies that on a geographic basis, that growth is more evenly distributed. Generally slow economic growth areas like Ohio, one of the things I propose is that we limit interest rates on business investments in this state. So it gets kind of complicated, but that's one of the objectives that I have. But overall, things are looking good in Ohio. Things are looking good in this country, and we're going to move on for 4 more years. We're going to look forward with President Obama.
And Mr. Joyce, do you feel Ohio, with those unemployment figures I just mentioned earlier, do you feel Ohio is better off than the rest of the country, or is that a misleading statistic?
Well, I think we have to give credit where credit's due, and Governor Kasich has done a wonderful job with people like State Rep. Marlene Anelski working hard and creating the Common Sense Initiative, guys like Jack Schron here in Cuyahoga County getting the county back on course, and we're trying to get together, and we have certain things here in Ohio that have come together at the same time, not just the auto industry, but I think we have a tremendous asset here in our energy products. We have coal. We need to explore. We certainly have the industry with oil and gas that we need to explore. There's been a lot of businesses that have been going strong, like in Youngstown with our sheet, with our metal and creating tubing and things like that. We need to continue to do those things that help grow our economy and help government work to help those who are creating jobs do the right thing. Also, we want to bring to what the state's doing, a common sense initiative to the federal government. We need to make sure that we're getting out of businesses' way, assisting them where they can, but stopping the cutting of them from proceeding on businesses like oil and gas exploration here in the United States.
Okay. Mr. Blanchard made his position pretty clear on the auto industry bailout. So I wanted to ask you, Mr. Joyce, do you support the auto industry bailout, and why or why not? And Mr. Blanchard, you'll have 30 seconds to respond.
I believe that the auto industry has gotten itself into some problems because of things that are going on outside the United States. When we have Chinese parts flooding this industry and cutting the cost for American workers, it makes it tougher all the time for them. We need to do something common sense and go after China and address the problems that they have so they can't flood our market and let the American workers produce American products for American cars.
Mr. Blanchard, you have 30 seconds.
I believe the question was concerning the GM and Chrysler
The auto
bailout.
yes.
I totally supported it, as I mentioned earlier. You know, and again, I think a lot of Republicans were upset with this because the auto bailout actually helped working people. The Democratic Party and Dale Blanchard will stand for those of us who work for a living. It's a shame that too often Republicans are always attacking working people, whether they're union workers, whether they're public sector or private sectors. You know, if I was a teacher, I'd walk around with my head down the way that the Republicans always are attacking folks. So Dale Blanchard is going to stand with the working people of the 14th Congressional District.
Okay, another similarly themed question about the stimulus package that was passed a few years ago. And I'll start with you, Mr. Blanchard, and I might ask a slightly different question to Mr. Joyce based on your response. But do you feel you feel that the stimulus package was good for the nation? But I wondered, did it come at too high of a cost?
It did not come at too high of a cost. I totally supported the stimulus package. It did help. It prevented our unemployment rate from going to 13%. It only went up to as high as 10%. We needed to continue it. However, the problem was that the Tea Party got elected to Congress, and again, they don't care about ordinary folks. But I also mention this. I'm going to mention this. George Bush, with his passage of TARP, that was really the big thing that saved this economy. If TARP had not passed, we wouldn't be talking about unemployment rates of 8, 9, or 10%. We'd be talking about unemployment rates of 20, 25, or 30%. So I think both President Bush and President Obama took, and the Congress, took courageous efforts to go ahead and stop this economy from falling off the cliff back in 2008 and 2009.
Okay, Mr. Joyce, just slightly different version of that question. Do you feel that there were too much adding to the deficit with the stimulus program? But were there parts of it that you thought were appropriate and that you support?
I believe that when we're borrowing 40 cents on every dollar to stimulate our economy, what are we really stimulating? What we need to do is get out of the way of the people who create jobs, let those people do what they do naturally, help them in a way that's consistent with everyday people, small business owners, large business owners, hardworking ladies and gentlemen who are taxpayers, who have their own little mom and pop thing. Let them do what they do best. Giving the stimulus money away is a false encouragement, that as though people will be buying products that there really isn't a market going forward for. So while you stimulate the economy in the short run, what have we done to cure the problems in our economy in the long term? We need to take a global approach to this. We need to set the budget. We need to do what's necessary with the tax code so businesses have the ability to plan going forward instead of short-term stimulations that really don't create a strong economy.
Okay, this question is for both of you gentlemen. And we'll start with Mr. Joyce this time. It's kind of along the same lines with the deficit. How can the nation's deficit be brought down? And specifically, would you support using increases in revenue in combination with cuts in spending to help bring it down? Or is there just simply enough to trim from the federal budget?
Well, I believe that first we have to look at the Simpson-Bowles plan, or something that's bipartisan, and look at the economy and what we're spending as a whole, the budget as a whole. But the trouble is, we haven't been on a budget. The Senate hasn't passed a budget in 3 years. And so as government keeps providing these continuing resolutions, we just keep trying to spend our way out of the problem, and that's not happening, obviously. So what we need to do is get our arms around the budget, set a budget. Some areas we have to take a scalpel to, and some areas we have to take a meat axe to, but we have to cut spending in many different ways in order to get where we need to go. As I said in the beginning, we didn't get to $16 trillion overnight, and we're not going to get out of this tomorrow. But we have to at least put our arms around a budget and put our arms around the plan to cut the deficit at a meaningful rate going forward.
And how about you, Mr. Blanchard? Would you, what can be done to bring the nation's deficit down, and would you support increases in revenue in combination with cuts in spending, or is there just enough that we can trim?
Well, first of all, a CR, or a continuing resolution, is a budget. As I mentioned earlier, part of our budget is our budget that's going to be there. Our deficit is the deficit that's going to be there, even if we brought our structural deficit. It's going to be there even if we were to bring our unemployment levels down to as low as they could be. To that extent, I do support increasing taxes, and the people who could afford the taxes the most are the wealthiest of Americans. But most of the deficit is related to the fact that the economy is underperforming. That is why I want to stimulate the economy in such a way that it will be long-term. The purpose of stimulating the economy is to create jobs and to create an atmosphere where businesses are going to expand their operations. That's the whole objective. And once that occurs, we'll be back up to full employment. The deficit will come crumbling down, and that's the best way to approach it. Thank you.
This next question is for Mr. Joyce. It's kind of a follow-up question. Mr. Blanchard said he would support tax increases to help trim the deficit. So I was wondering about you, Mr. Joyce, specifically. Would you say yes to any tax increases? Are they off the table, or are they part of a balanced plan?
As I stated before, I don't think in this economy you can tax your way to prosperity, and nor should you just tax people without having some form of a budget in place. Taxes being raised right now should not occur. Just shouldn't occur. What we need to do is allow the people who create jobs to be able to do that. And to do that, we're talking about people who own small businesses. We're talking about agricultural and farmers and people who rely on having a set known tax and to raise taxes on them, or in the estate tax, which I really think is terrible for those families, puts them in a position where they're having to sell the family farm or sell the family business just to pay taxes. And that's just not right. We need to get a tax policy in place that it would reduce taxes to a point where the people would be hired, and that alone in the hiring process and allowing the businesses to grow would stimulate the economy by the growth in the economy.
And Mr. Blanchard, you have 30 seconds if you'd like to use for a rebuttal.
Well, Mr. Joyce put his fingers on it pretty much. He calls for a lot of tax cuts for the millionaires and the billionaires. Earlier he referred to reducing the top tax rates, top marginal rates, but he wants to broaden it. What that means is he wants to cut taxes for millionaires and billionaires, but raise your taxes. That's what it means by broadening the overall tax code. So I thought I'd translate that for you. Thank you.
This question is... this question also on government spending, and is for both of you. What needs to be done to strengthen Social Security? Dale, if we could start with you.
Well, it is very good that this issue has come to the forefront now. It's been something I've been talking about when I've been running for Congress for 12 years here in this district, and this is something that I've always talked about. We need to do something about Social Security and Medicare. I don't like the Paul Ryan approach of cutting Medicare for people born after 1956. And anybody who's born after 1956, if you vote Republican, you need your head examined. Unfortunately, a lot of folks aren't paying attention to the issue, but they're really wanting to cut your benefits. And after they get rid of ours, and I'm one of those people born after 1956, they're coming after everybody else. What I propose is this. I propose that we have a small increase, very small increase over each of the next 15 to 20 years for both Social Security and Medicare, the FICA taxes that support both of these programs. That's what I support that we do, to make sure that these programs have sufficient funding to move from here on out. You have to remember, these programs, Medicare and Social Security, have specific taxes that are dedicated to funding them. The problem is we don't have enough funds as the baby boomers are retiring. Therefore, that's what we need to do, is properly fund those taxes. Thank you.
And Mr. Joyce, what do you think needs to be done to strengthen Social Security?
Well, I believe I just heard a tax hike, but for somebody who's cutting taxes, but that's okay. What we need to do is be sure that we make our seniors, that we're going to take care of them with the sacred promise we made to the seniors, that their benefits will be there. We got to stop scaring seniors, and that's what you do when you say you're going to be cutting things. And I don't agree that today's seniors are greedy. They're getting what they're entitled to. My parents passed away on it. I understand what it means. It's Social Security and Medicare should be in place, and I will do whatever I can to keep them in place. But the premise is wrong. When we first initiated Social Security, it was born in the 30s. They had people who were going to live into their 64, and they weren't entitled to benefits till they're 65. The premise is wrong. We need to start over there. We need to recalculate that. We have 10,000 people retiring every single day. Now, how do you justify the system going on as it is? It's going broke, and unless we're going to be man up to it and start to do what we need to do to make it work, then we have to be true and honest with people. We need to do it's been a demographic shift. So therefore, if we increase 1 month a year just in the disability for the next 20 years, things will start to come to even. But also, I think it's not necessarily a tax, but we need to income test those who are receiving those benefits. So if they can afford to pay for their share of it, then they should pay for their share of it also, and secure it for the people who truly need it.
Okay, we have time for one more question from me before we move on to the audience portion. And sticking with the same theme, and we'll start with you, Mr. Joyce. You talked about this a little bit ago, but I want you to expand on it a little bit farther. What is your plan to address Medicare, especially as baby boomers are reaching retirement age?
Well, the Medicare system is one that I don't believe Mr. Blanchard has said a number of times that I'm a fan of the Paul Ryan budget. I'm a fan of getting the discussion started. We have to talk about something in a budget. We have to put something in place. And if that's a starting block for it, that's fine. I don't necessarily agree in the voucher system, but I don't believe that the government being involved in the Medicare treatment is something, we'll end up with the compassion of the IRS and the efficiency of the post office. We need to continue on the same pattern we have of letting the people make their own choices, because we shouldn't come between an individual patient making choices. We also need to help our doctors, because our doctors are running tests time and time again because they're afraid of what's going to happen to them. So they'll run the test to make sure they're not going to get sued. And that's not fair either. So I want to make sure that we protect our doctors as well as protect our patients, so people in Medicare can have the ability to make those decisions on their own.
And how about you, Mr. Blanchard? What is your plan to address Medicare, especially as baby boomers are reaching retirement age?
Well, as I mentioned before, I support increasing the FICA taxes, the dedicated taxes that support both Social Security and Medicare. Mr. Joyce mentioned something a little earlier about means testing, benefits. Let me translate that for you. For all of you folks out there who make around $40,000 a year or more and you're paying all your FICA taxes, guess what, folks? What Mr. Joyce wants to do and his Republican friends, they want to reduce your future Social Security and Medicare benefits because they think you make too much, even though you've been the ones who've been paying the bulk of the taxes. I totally disagree with that. We just need to fund these programs through slightly increasing the FICA taxes. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll have a word from Jim.
Thank you, John, and candidates. And you can catch your breath for a moment and have a sip of water. I have just a couple of mid-form announcements before the traditional City Club question and answer period. I want to ensure that the audience makes their questions and state them as clearly and briefly as possible. We'd like to thank supporters in the room who have purchased tables today. Your names are printed in the program. Thank you for your support. And we have a list of all upcoming City Club programs. On the back of the program, we have a debate on the redistricting issue 2, this coming Friday. So if you'd like to come back and join us again on Friday, we'd welcome you. And now I will turn it back over to John for audience question and answer portion of the period. Carrie Miller has the microphone, and she's running out through the audience there for the first question.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you both for taking the time out to be with us today. My question is for both of you, and I'll probably start with Mr. Blanchard. You're both seeking to replace a long-term incumbent who had built up years of influence in Washington, and influence is the currency of Congress. So I want to ask both of you, as you're going to be a freshman legislator, how will you make a difference when you don't have that cachet of influence built up over the years like Congressman LaTourette did? And I would especially ask you, Mr. Blanchard, as it appears that most likely the Republicans will still hold the majority in the House. So thank you both, and thanks for your time.
Thank you for the question. Well, this guy named Dale Carnegie. It wasn't me. He came up and he wrote this, I think he wrote this book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. Well, I'm going to try to just pour on a charm and work my way through Washington. Yes, you do have to work with both Republicans and the Democrats and to try to build consensus. The one thing I hope that will be missing once I arrive at Washington, even if the Republicans do maintain the House, is that the Tea Party influence is reduced. That's what unfortunately chased Mr. LaTourette out of Washington. The Tea Party group, they just weren't governing. Mr. LaTourette wanted to govern, and they just weren't willing to govern. President Obama and the Speaker, Boehner, had an agreement on the budget. And when he went back to his caucus, they just said no. They weren't interested in budgeting, in bargaining. In addition to that, we almost had a situation where the debt ceiling was missed because the Republicans, the Tea Party people particularly, just weren't going to vote to go ahead and continue government, and so that this country could operate in a proper manner. Thank you.
Mr. Joyce?
Well, obviously, you're absolutely correct that one, you'll be one of 435, and two, you'll be at the bottom of the totem pole. But, and I know that from the things we've heard today from Mr. Blanchard and his party, he could hold that meeting in a telephone booth with all the other Democrats who share his ideas and thoughts. But when you put words in my mouth, Dale, remember one thing. I care about America just as much as you do. And when I get to America, I want to tell the truth. I'm going to tell the truth to the people I represent. I'm going to tell the truth to the other people that I'm working with. And I'm a fact-based problem solver, and we're going to get to the bottom of issues. And I'm going to come back home and tell the newspapers here what we're trying to do. And that's the only way we can make it work. We have to start being level with the American people and stop playing these games of blaming the Tea Party or blaming George Bush. No, blame Congress. That's where Congress has created the problem. Congress needs to solve the problem. I want to be one of the problem solvers.
One of the things we keep on hearing is that the rich don't pay their fair share. I'm not a millionaire or a billionaire, but the top 2% of earners pay 50% of all of the income taxes in the United States. And I'm curious, Mr. Blanchard, how much is their fair share?
Well, I don't believe that, I do believe that wealthy people pay their fair share. It's not a question of fair share, it's just a question of who can afford to pay any kind of increase in taxes. Having said that, if you look at my entire budget, or my entire plan, which you can see on, if you go to my website, which is Dale Blanchard for Congress, Dale Blanchard for Congress, Dale Blanchard for Congress. If you go there, you'll see I have a number of tax incentives for businesses. So it's not just tax increases that I'm talking about. I'm talking about changing the tax code. I'm a tax accountant. I'm talking about changing the tax code in such a way that it will promote economic growth. And so, and also, when I talked about increasing the FICA taxes, that's very broad-based. So let's not put the mantle on me that I'm just saying that we need to increase taxes just on wealthy people. Thank you.
And Mr. Joyce, you have 30 seconds to respond.
But I believe you said before that you were for raising the taxes on millionaires and billionaires and anybody else who makes over $250,000, and that's wrong. Because if we're going to pay, it should be fair. And I think the person who's paying at 100 or 250 or 500 should be paying the same thing. Everybody in America should be incentivized to go forward. That we shouldn't have a system, a tax code, that it provides disincentives for people to progress. And as the president said, we shouldn't be taxing people in a weak economy.
How you doing, gentlemen? I see that Congress is broken right here from just watching the debate. And one of the things that we seem to have a problem with is when it comes to compromising. So my question is for Mr. Joyce and for Mr. Blanchard. The first is, Mr. Joyce, if you were presented with a bill and that bill came across and it was $3 to every $1 of tax revenue as far as for spending cuts, would you vote for that bill? And if not, what deductions would you make besides closing tax loopholes on the rich in order to try to offset to make sure that the deficit is reduced and the budget is balanced? And for you, Mr. Blanchard, my question to you is if you were presented with a bill and it said that they had to raise taxes on the middle class and the rich in order to generate revenue, would you pass that bill? And if not, what deductions would you make in order to try to balance the deficit and also reduce the deficit and balance the bill, the budget?
Mr. Joyce, if you could respond first, please.
Thank you. I appreciate the hypothetical, but technically neither of us are in Congress at the moment to make that vote. But I can't tell you what I've done in Geauga County because that's the only thing you can base your vote on for me, for my record. For 24 years, I've been the prosecuting attorney. On January 5th, 1988, I stood in front of the crowd and I said, I promise you two things. I promise you I'm going to work at solving crime in this county, and we're going to work on making sure this county develops the way the people see fit, not the courts and not developers. And in 2008, Forbes magazine named Geauga County the 4th best county in the nation to live. Now, I didn't do that alone. I did it by reaching out to the other side. I did it by people who were the Democrat or Republican and all those different walks of life that got elected, reaching out to them and say, yesterday you were a partisan person, today you're an office holder, and we have to do what's right. And so when something's presented to me that's in the best interest of this country or in the best interest of the people of the 14th District or Northeastern Ohio, I'm going to do what's necessary. I'm going to vote my conscience, not as some political boss or political party.
And Mr. Blanchard.
Well, I don't believe that we ought to be cutting tax expenditures at all. If you listen to the Ryan budget, and I'm sorry I keep mentioning it, but it is a piece of legislation that passed the House. What it calls for is a 10% reduction in the rates that millionaires and billionaires pay. And in order to pay for it, they're going to eliminate a number of tax expenditures. Those expenditures include the mortgage interest deduction that you get for your home, also the property tax deduction. These two alone will actually drop the value of your homes. They also include the loss of the charitable contributions, also the loss of your state and local income taxes, and the one big one that they really want to go after is the tax deductibility for your employer-provided health insurance. So I will not do anything as far as reducing tax expenditures. I think these things are helpful to our economy. Thank you.
This question is for both of y'all. Since LaTourette retired, you had the opportunity to run in the Republican primary, and you didn't. And Mr. Blanchard, you've been running for a long time. Why should we either give both of y'all the opportunity?
Mr. Joyce, if you could answer first, please.
Well, first off, when the primaries took place in February, Congressman LaTourette was running. And I was running unopposed in my own county since I have done since 1992. And I like to think because I was doing a good job. But if given the opportunity, I had no idea that Congressman LaTourette was going to resign. And the day he did, after conferring with my wife and my kids, came to the conclusion that I would be honored to try to step up and represent Northeastern Ohio in the same manner in which Congressman LaTourette has done so diligently for the last 18 years. That's why I'm here. I made my case to the parties, the 7 county chairmen and the 7 county chairman secretaries, and I was voted by them unanimously to succeed Steve on the ballot. It's an honor to do so, and I want to do everything I can to be as good as a representative as I can be, as close to Steve as possible, because he's done such a wonderful job.
And Mr. Blanchard.
Well, the record shows that David Joyce has been a fantastic county prosecutor. But folks, I've been running for Congress, contemplating it and running it for almost 20 years. I have been preparing myself. I am prepared to go to Washington. I understand the tax code. I understand that there are adjustments that we can make to the tax code that will create stronger economic growth. And so that's why I'm running for Congress. I think I'm very prepared, and I'm going to make the 14th Congressional District very proud of me.
That is my question. I thank you very much, you two. I am sad to say not you all, because there are other people on the ballot. But if you were to win, could you please stand for free speech and have all the people on the ballot come? And if they don't, will you say, then I won't be part of it? Free speech is free speech.
We could start with you, Mr. Blanchard. What do you think of that question?
Well, thank you very much. Well, free speech is free speech. I was not in charge of selecting who would come to the City Club today. I think I know where you're going with this. So, you know, we all have to respect our hosts. For example, last night, I drove way out to Kinsman. That's almost as far as you can get from Solon in the district. No, it's not as far, but it's a long way. And I did not get a chance to speak. So, but those were the rules of that particular organization. So I do believe in free speech, but it's up to the host as to what the rules are. Thank you.
Mr. Joyce, what's your opinion on that question?
Thank you. And I understand, because I saw you out front as I was coming in today, that you might be part with Mr. Macco and Ms. Mastro Matteo and Mr. Blanchard and I. And I can think it's safe to say that we all believe in our country. We all love our country, and we all want what's best for our country. But we didn't make up the rules today. We're just here talking about our view because we were invited to be here. But I wouldn't have any problems, as we have throughout the district, standing side by side with them and letting all those views be heard, because it's important. That's what America's about. America's not about one view. It's about all of our views.
Good afternoon. I was just wondering, you know, as I talk to a lot of people in Northeast Ohio, they believe that the federal government is being intrusive in local municipalities, in state government. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts of letting either the states or the local municipalities make their own decisions?
And if we could start with Mr. Blanchard first.
Okay.
Yep. Just wanted to change it
How you
around.
doing? This is my state representative. Well, part of the reason why the federal government has a lot of say-so in state and local areas is state and local governments don't raise enough taxes to break away from the federal government. So the federal government provides state and local governments with a lot of tax assistance. And that's where the federal government really gets its leverage from. So there's just a tendency of people not to want to be taxed. But the federal government, which has a unique position in our economy, they can raise taxes, borrow money, and they can coin money, has the ability to help state and local governments out, and they do, and sometimes there are strings that are attached. But we know when I get to Washington, to the extent that there is any problem that any municipality or school district or the state of Ohio has, please come to me and I'll work with them to try to mediate whatever that problem is.
And Mr. Joyce, and that was the final question from the audience. So if you could respond to that question, please.
I believe the federal government has gotten too big, and it's in too much of our lives, and we need to cut back. In days of old, I used to say, cut our pay and send us home, where we know people are safe, because I think this government in the city or township level is more responsive to the needs of their people. If you want a police department, then you're taxed for that police department. If you want the fire department, then you're taxed for that fire department. If you want good schools, then you pay the taxes in those schools. And so that's reflected on the areas you live. And the federal government coming from above and telling you how things should be run just doesn't work. That's not what the America we developed in. It should be, states should be able to set the pace in which they want to grow, the way they see fit, as well as cities, and the federal government should be there to help on their bigger ticket issues like infrastructure, making sure that Americans can travel throughout the country in a safe manner, and making sure that our goods and services can get to port and be able to be marketed and stay out of the day-to-day lives of the city and the states.
Okay, we thank you very much, audience, for your questions. Now the closing question. I will ask the candidates a question, and each candidate will have 3 minutes to make their remarks, including their closing statement. Mr. Blanchard will go first. So, Mr. Blanchard? My question is, what can be done to encourage bipartisanship in Washington, D.C.? Obviously, that's the reason that Congressman Latourette cited when he was going to retire. So are you someone who can work with members of the opposite party? And can you give me an example of how you might do that?
Sure. Excellent question. Bipartisanship could improve if we didn't have these crazy gerrymandered districts. If districts were created in such a way that you would get an even split among Democrats and Republicans within a state. For example, Ohio is pretty much a swing state. All these districts should be created in such a way that they're all competitive. If you did that, the people who would end up in Congress would have to be people who could attract folks from both sides of the aisle. That's the way that you would end up winning your election. As far as myself, I could work with Republicans. I'm basically a centrist Democrat. And if you listen to what I've said, or if you go to my website, which is Dale Blanchard for Congress, you will see that I have a lot of tax cuts. I have a lot of centrist ideas that will grow this economy. So I'm not a far left-wing person, but I'm very much a centrist. I think I've got very pragmatic ideas. One thing I liked about Steve, for the most part, was he was a very pragmatic person. And I'm going to do the same thing. Now, in closing, again, I want to thank the City Club. I want to thank the audience. I want to thank Mr. Joyce. This has been an incredible adventure for me. And on November 6th, I urge that you all go out and vote for Dale Blanchard for Congress. What I want to do, folks, is I want to grow the economy and put more money in each and every one of your pockets. And then after that, prosperity will rain down on all of us, and we'll be singing Happy Days Are Here Again. Thank you all very much, and God bless you.
And now we'll hear from Mr. Joyce. Mr. Joyce, what do you think can be done to encourage bipartisanship and end the gridlock in Washington, D.C.? And are you someone who can work with members of the opposite party? And can you give me an example of how you could accomplish that?
I spoke to it a little bit in addressing your question before, but I also, when this race first came up and I found out on August 10th that I was going to be appointed, the first thing I did was reach out to my opponent, Dale Blanchard. Call me old-fashioned, but I wanted to shake his hand and look him in the eye and tell him, Dale, let's run a positive campaign, something crazy in America. run about issues, talk about the things that matter to our country and to our district, and do the right thing. And Dale shook your hands. I gave him my cell phone number. I said, if you ever hear anyone saying that I'm speaking ill of you, call me. We'll settle it right then and there. And I appreciate it because he's been a gentleman, as well as the other two participants in this race. And I think that's the way America has to start to operate. It's been childish what's been taking place, and I am, just like you, frustrated with what's taking place in Congress. What makes me think that I should get up off my duff at 55 years old and go to Washington, D.C. to break that gridlock? Because I care. It's not about the next generation. I mean, it's not about the next election. It is about the next generation. Oops. But I care deeply because I want the America that we grew up with, where hardworking taxpayers are going to see America, because I think our best days are still ahead. I really do. I think America can continue to prosper, continue to grow. It just got off track. We need to get back to the main track. We need to push forward in the direction in which all Americans can agree. And that's not that hard. It has been divisive right now. But I think the one thing I've always told my children, and what we learned from my dad, was that truth will set you free. Always tell the truth. You don't have to worry about it because you don't have to remember what you said if you lied. If you tell the truth and you're straightforward with people, you'll be fine in this world. And the other thing Dad always told us was, you're only ever truly worth your handshake and your word. And I shook a lot of hands during this campaign, and I've given my word out there. I promise to God I'll do my best to represent the people of the 14th District the way I would represent my own family and our interests in making sure that America and this area of Northeastern Ohio still remains the greatest location in the nation. Thank you all very much. I appreciate your attention and being here today. God bless you all, and God bless America.
We thank both of you candidates for being here today, Dale Virgil Blanchard and David Joyce, and thank you to the audience. Remember, Election Day is Tuesday, November 6th.
Thank you, and let me add my thanks to John for doing a terrific job moderating. This forum is now adjourned.